My father made me count to 10 before entering the basement. I just stopped at 9. The rule started when I was 6 years old. My father sat me down at the kitchen table, his hands folded in front of him, his face more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Ethan, I need you to listen very carefully," he said, his voice low and steady. "Whenever you need to go into the basement, you must count to 10 before opening the door. Out loud, slowly. Never rush it, never skip a number. And most importantly, never, ever stop before you reach 10. I remember asking him why. The way any curious 6-year-old would. He just shook his head and said, "Because if you don't, something will know you're coming. And you don't want that. Son, trust me on this." At the time, I thought it was just another one of his weird rules, like not whistling after dark or never leaving shoes upside down by the door. My father had a lot of strange habits, things he insisted on, that my mother would roll her eyes at, but never questioned. Looking back now, I realize she knew. She knew exactly why he had these rules. And she was just as terrified as he was. For 12 years, I followed that rule religiously. Every single time I needed to go down to the basement, whether it was to grab something from storage, do laundry, or fetch tools for my father, I would stand at that door and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 0. Then, and only then, would I turn the handle and descend those creaking wooden stairs into the darkness below. The basement itself was ordinary enough. Unfinished concrete walls, exposed pipes running across the ceiling, boxes stacked in corners, a washing machine and dryer humming in one section. My father's workbench cluttered with tools in another. There was nothing visibly wrong with it. Nothing that screamed danger or supernatural threat, but there was always this feeling, this pressure in the air that made my skin prickle and my breath come a little faster. Like the space itself was watching me, waiting for something. My father never explained what would happen if I didn't count, never elaborated on what exactly was down there that needed warning, and, honestly, I never wanted to know badly enough to test it until last Thursday. I'm 18 now. Graduated high school last month. Getting ready to leave for college in the fall. I've been packing up my childhood belongings, sorting through years of accumulated stuff, deciding what to keep and what to donate. My mother asked me to grab some old photo albums from the basement storage. Said she wanted to put together a memory book before I left. It was late, almost 11 p.m., and I was tired from packing all day. I walked to the basement door, my hand on the knob, and started counting out of pure habit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then my phone rang in my pocket, startling me. Without thinking, I pulled it out to check who was calling. And in that moment of distraction, I turned the handle and pulled the door open. I didn't say 10. I didn't complete the count. I just opened the door at 9 and started down the stairs. Phone pressed to my ear as my friend Kevin rambled about party plans for the weekend. I was 3 steps down when I felt it. A shift in the air, like pressure dropping before a storm. The temperature plummeted so fast I could see my breath. Friends of Chloe. And the lights. All 3 bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling flickered once and went dark. Kevin's voice in my ear dissolved into static, then cut out completely. I pulled the phone away and saw the screen was black, completely dead, despite having been at 67% battery just seconds before. The darkness in the basement was absolute, the kind of thick smothering black that feels almost solid. I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. And then I heard it breathing. Not my breathing, something else. Something down there in the dark with me. Inhaling and exhaling, in a rhythm that was just slightly wrong. Too slow and too deep to be human. My entire body went rigid with primal fear. Every instinct screaming at me to run back up those stairs. But I couldn't move. Couldn't make my legs work. The breathing got closer, and with it came a smell, rot, and mildew. And something chemical that burned my nose and made my eyes water. I heard movement. Not footsteps exactly, but a fucking not a Marcus, dragging, scraping sound, like something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. It was moving toward the stairs, toward me. "Dad," I tried to scream, but my voice came out as barely a whisper, my throat closed with terror. The scraping sound stopped. The breathing stopped. Everything went perfectly, horrifyingly silent. And then I heard a voice. My father's voice, but wrong, distorted, like it was being played through water or static. You didn't finish counting, Ethan. You stopped at 9. Now it knows you're here. The lights suddenly blazed back to life, so bright, they were painful after the darkness. I was still frozen on the third step, my hand gripping the railing so hard my knuckles were white. The basement looked completely normal, empty. No sign of anything that could have made those sounds, that breathing, that scraping, but the smell lingered, that chemical, rot smell that made me gag. I stumbled backward up the stairs, nearly falling, in my haste to get away from that space. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. My phone buzzed back to life in my hand, Kevin's voice suddenly clear. Yo! You? Still there? Why'd you hang up? I couldn't answer him. Couldn't form words. I just ended the call and slid down to sit on the floor, staring at that closed basement door. After maybe 10 minutes, I heard my father's truck pull into the driveway. He'd been at his night shift at the factory, wasn't supposed to be home until morning. But somehow he knew. He always knew. He came through the front door and found me sitting there, saw my face, saw where I was. And his expression went from concerned to devastated in seconds. You went down without finishing the count. It wasn't a question. I nodded, still unable to speak. My father sat down next to me, his back against the wall, and put his head in his hands. I was hoping I'd never have to explain this to you, he said quietly. I was hoping you'd go off to college and never have to know the truth about this house, about our family. But you broke the count. And now it's seen you. It knows you exist, and that changes everything. He took a deep breath and looked at me, his eyes red and tired. This house has been in our family for 4 generations. Ethan, your great-great-grandfather built for it in 1923. And he built it on top of something that was already here, something old, something that should have stayed buried. He explained that, when his grandfather was excavating the basement, the workers had found a chamber, a space carved into the bedrock that predated any human settlement in the area. Inside that chamber were markings on the walls, symbols that no one could read, and a stone door that was sealed shut. Being practical men who, they didn't believe in superstitions, they decided to open that door to see what was behind it. 3 of the 5 workers died that same night. Unexplained deaths, the report said. 1 drowned in his bathtub despite there being no water. 1 was found torn apart in his locked bedroom. The 3rd simply disappeared, and they never found his body. My great-great-grandfather and the surviving workers sealed the chamber back up, poured concrete over it, and built the basement floor on top. But sealing it didn't make it go away. My father said, whatever was behind that stone door, whatever they had disturbed by opening it even briefly, it stayed aware. It stayed hungry. And it particularly noticed members of our family. The bloodline of the man who had violated its prison. My great-great-grandfather had started having nightmares. Dreams of something scratching at the basement floor, trying to claw its way up through the concrete. He began hearing sounds. That same breathing and scraping I'd heard always, coming from below the house. It drove him half mad until he figured out the pattern. The thing, whatever it was, could only sense people when they were transitioning into its space. When they were opening the door to the basement, standing on that threshold between the upper house and the lower level. That's when it could reach out, could touch minds, could drag people down into its awareness. But if you announced yourself, if you counted slowly and deliberately from 1 to 10, it somehow satisfied whatever rules or limitations bound the creature. It knew you were coming, but it couldn't touch you. The count was a warning, a ritual that kept you safe. As long as you completed it, you could go into the basement freely, and the thing would leave you alone. But you stopped at 9, my father said, his voice hollow. You opened the door without finishing the ritual. So now the thing has sensed you in an incomplete state, has touched your mind without the protection the counting provides. And I don't know what that means, Ethan. I don't know what it can do now that it's aware of you outside the proper context. He looked at me with genuine fear. My grandfather, your great-grandfather. He tried to test the boundaries once when he was young. Stopped his count at 8, then quickly finished and said 9 and 10. He thought it wouldn't matter that he'd completed it close enough. That night, he woke up to find marks on his skin, Symbols like the ones in the sealed chamber burned into his arms and chest. They never healed properly. Left scars he carried his whole life. And after that, he said he could feel it. Sometimes, the thing in the chamber could sense it watching him even when he wasn't near the basement. It had marked him, claimed some small piece of him by touching his awareness during that incomplete count. My father lifted his shirt and showed me his own torso, covered in faded scars that I'd always assumed were from accidents or his work at the factory. I made the same mistake when I was 16. Stopped at 7 because I thought I heard my mother calling me. Never finished the count before opening the door. And that night, these appeared. I felt it watching me ever since Ethan. For 32 years, I felt something looking at me through the cracks in reality. I pulled up my sleeves with shaking hands, already knowing what I'd find. There on my forearms were marks that hadn't been there an hour ago. Thin lines forming, geometric patterns, symbols that hurt to look at directly. That seemed to shift and change when I wasn't focusing on them. They weren't burned into my skin, they were part of my skin like they'd always been there and were just now deciding to become visible. What do I do? I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. How do I make it stop watching me? My father shook his head. You can't. Once it's aware of you, once it's marked you, that's permanent. The best you can do is learn to live with it. Learn the rules that keep it from getting too close and hope that you never give it another opportunity to touch you more deeply. He stood up and offered me his hand, pulling me to my feet. Come on, I need to show you something else. Something I'd hoped you'd never need to see. He led me to his bedroom, to the closet I'd never been allowed to open as a child. Inside, behind his clothes, was a door I'd never noticed before. Small and painted the same color as the wall. My father pulled out a key from around his neck, unlocked it, revealing a tiny room, barely bigger than a closet with walls covered in papers. Every surface was filled with documentation, newspaper clippings, old photographs, handwritten notes, diagrams, and drawings of symbols that matched the ones now on my skin. This is everything I've collected about the deity thing in the chamber, my father said, gesturing to the walls. Everything my father passed down to me. Everything I've researched myself. Every incident, every pattern, every rule I've learned about how it operates. I stepped into the small room, scanning the papers, trying to process the sheer volume of information. One newspaper clipping caught my eye. Dated 1956. Headline, reading: Local man dies in mysterious circumstances. The article described how Leonard Thorne, a construction worker, had been found dead in the basement of a house on our street. Our house. Torn apart in a manner that police couldn't explain. The official cause of death was listed as animal attack, but the article noted that the basement had been locked from the inside, and no animal was found. That was my uncle, my father said quietly. My father's brother. He lived with us for a while. And one night, he went into the basement without counting at all. Just opened the door and walked down. They found him 3 hours later. Whatever's down there, when it gets a full opening like that, when someone gives it complete access by breaking the ritual entirely, it can manifest physically for a brief time, can cross over into our reality, just enough to do what it did to Leonard. I felt my stomach turn, bile rising in my throat. So, what happened to me stopping at 9? That's not as bad as not counting at all. My father nodded. The incomplete count is a partial breach. It gives the thing awareness of you, allows it to mark you and watch you, but it can't physically manifest against you the way it could if you'd completely ignored the ritual. You're connected to it now, but not fully vulnerable. Not yet. He pulled down a leather-bound journal from a shelf I hadn't noticed. Its pages yellowed with age. This belonged to my grandfather. He wrote down everything he learned about the chamber and the thing inside it. Most of it is speculation, theories based on the symbols, and on family history passed down from his father. But there are some concrete rules. He discovered ways to minimize the thing's influence once you've been marked. I took the journal and flipped through the pages, seeing dense handwriting and faded ink. Drawings of symbols. What looked like ritual instructions. One page was titled, Rules for the Marked. And I read through the list with growing dread. Never sleep in the basement. Never go down alone after midnight. Never speak its name if you learn it. Always complete any count you start, even if not at the basement door. Burn sage in your room once a week. Wear iron on your person. Never make eye contact with your reflection in the basement. And most ominously, if it calls to you, do not answer. It will call to you, my father said, watching me read. That's what happens to those of us who've been marked. You'll hear a voice, sometimes it sounds like a family member, sometimes like a stranger, sometimes like something that isn't trying to sound human at all. It will call your name, usually late at night, and it will sound like it's coming from the basement. Every instinct you have will want to go down and investigate. You absolutely cannot. If you go down, when it's calling, if you open that door, while it's actively reaching out to you, the counting won't protect you anymore. You'll be giving it permission to pull you in. As if on cue, we heard it. A voice, distant and muffled, but definitely coming from below us. Ethan, I need you down here. Can you help me? It sounded exactly like my mother. My father grabbed my arm hard. That's not your mother. Your mother is visiting your aunt in Philadelphia. That's it. Using her voice because it knows you'd respond to her. Don't go. Don't even acknowledge that you heard it. The voice came again, more insistent. Ethan, please. I'm stuck down here. I need you to open the door. Every parental instinct I'd been raised with was screaming at me to help. To go check. To make sure my mother was okay, even though my rational brain knew she was 2 states away. My father must have. I've seen the conflict on my face because he pulled me out of the room and closed the door, muffling the voice. This is what I meant about living with it. The thing will test you, will try to trick you, will use every psychological tool it has to get you to break the rules. You have to be stronger than your instincts. You have to remember that it lies. We went back to the kitchen and my father made coffee, his hands shaking slightly as he poured. I need to tell you the rest, he said. The part I've been dreading. He sat down heavily, suddenly looking much older than his 48 years. The marks on your skin, they're not just cosmetic. They're a connection, a link between you and the thing in the chamber. And that connection gets stronger over time. My grandfather in his journal, he documented the progression. First, you just feel watched. Then you start hearing it called to you. Then you begin having dreams about it, seeing what it sees, understanding things you shouldn't know. And eventually, if you're not careful, if you break enough rules or give it enough access, you start to change. He rolled up his pant leg and showed me his calf, where the skin had a strange texture, almost like scales or very fine cracks forming patterns, similar to the symbols. This started about 5 years ago. It's spreading slowly, but it is spreading. My father had it too. Covered most of his torso by the time he died. It doesn't hurt, doesn't affect your health as far as I can tell, but it's a physical manifestation of how deeply the thing has its hooks in you. I looked at my own arms at the fresh marks still visible, and felt a wave of despair. So, I'm just going to slowly turn into what? What even is it? What's actually down there? My father shrugged helplessly. I don't know. My grandfather didn't know. The symbols in the chamber aren't any language anyone has ever identified. The few researchers my grandfather showed photographs to back before he learned to keep it secret, they said the markings predated known human civilization. Some thought they might be Native American, but the local tribes had no record of anything being here before our family. I built the house. The land was considered cursed, avoided. They wouldn't say why. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. An old grainy image of the chamber before it was sealed. The stone walls were covered in those same symbols that now marked my skin, spiraling inward toward a door that looked like it was made of a single piece of black rock. The door had no handle, no visible hinges, but there was a crack down the middle where it had been opened. My great-great-grandfather and his worker opened that door, my father said. They used crowbars and took them nearly 6 hours to create a gap wide enough to see inside. And what they saw? It's in the journal. My grandfather wrote down his father's account. He flipped to a page near the end of the journal and handed it to me. The handwriting here was shakier, more frantic. Beyond the door was a space that shouldn't exist, larger than possible given the dimensions of the chamber, dark but not empty, full of something that moved without moving, that breathed without lungs, that watched without eyes. We saw shapes that hurt to perceive, geometry that violated the laws of physics, and we heard it speak, not in words, but directly into our minds, telling us what it was, what it wanted, what would happen if we let it out. My partner, William Cross. He collapsed immediately, started screaming. About cities made of bone and skies made of skin. About things eating themselves to give birth to new hungers. We dragged him out and sealed the door. But it was too late. We'd been seen. It knew we existed. And it has never stopped watching our bloodline, waiting for one of us to make a mistake big enough that it can slip through. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls of the kitchen were closing in. So that's it. I'm just marked for life. Connected to some eldritch thing trapped under our house, slowly changing into something not quite human. Listening to it call my name for the rest of my life. My father reached across the table and gripped my hand, his eyes desperate. No, there's one way to break the connection completely. But Ethan, it's not something I can ask you to do. It's not something I could do myself when I had the chance. He pulled out another document from the journal. This one, newer, written in my father's own handwriting. I've spent 30 years researching this, talking to anyone who might have knowledge about seals and bindings and ancient prisons. I found a woman in New Mexico, a specialist in pre-Columbian artifacts and legends, who studied the photographs of the symbols. She said they're similar to markings found in caves throughout the Southwest, places where indigenous peoples had sealed away things they called the first hunger, entities that existed before humans, and viewed all life as sustenance. According to her research, these prisons could only be permanently sealed by a voluntary sacrifice. Someone with a blood connection to the original violation had to enter the chamber, close the door from the inside, and remain there to maintain the seal, essentially becoming part of the prison, trading their existence for the safety of everyone else. Your great-grandfather considered it, my father said, but he had young children, couldn't bring himself to leave them. My father considered it too. But by the time he fully understood what was required, he was too old and sick to make the journey down. And I've thought about it almost every day since I learned the truth. But I kept hoping there was another way. I kept researching alternatives, and then you were born, and I wanted to see you grow up. Wanted to be there for you. He was crying now, tears running down his face. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I should have done it years ago. Should have sealed that thing away permanently before you ever had a chance to be marked by it. But I was selfish and weak. And now you're connected to it too. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was telling me. Someone had to go into that chamber and stay there, sealed in with that thing forever. That was the only way to truly end its influence, to break the marks, and stop it from slowly transforming us into extensions of itself. The alternative was to keep living with it. Keep following the rules. Keep listening to it call our names and feeling it watch us through the cracks in reality, slowly changing, until we weren't entirely human anymore. What happened to the people who did enter the chambers? I asked. In the private, other places your researcher found, did anyone actually perform the sealing? My father nodded slowly. 3 documented cases. In each one, the volunteer entered the chamber and the door sealed behind them. The markings on family members faded within hours. The call and stopped. The presence disappeared completely. And the volunteer was never seen again. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed, each second feeling like an eternity. I looked at my father. At this man who'd carried this terrible knowledge for 3 decades. Who'd tried to protect me from ever learning the truth. And I understood the weight he'd been bearing my entire life. I need to think. I said finally. I need time to process all of this. My father nodded, wiping his eyes. Of course, I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight. I just needed you to know the full truth now that you've been marked. Needed you to understand what you're dealing with. He stood up and squeezed my shoulder. I'm going to stay up tonight. The first few nights after being marked are the hardest. It will try to call you more frequently. Try to establish a stronger connection while the link is new. I'll make sure you don't go down there. Even if you're not fully in control of yourself. I wanted to argue to say I'd be fine, but the truth was I could already feel something pulling at me. An awareness of the basement below us, a sense of something waiting, watching, wanting. It knew I was up here. It knew I'd seen it. And it wanted me to come back down. I went to my room, but didn't even try to sleep. Instead, I sat at my computer and started researching everything I could find about sealed chambers, ancient prisons, entities that predated human civilization. Most of what I found was speculation and legend, ancient apocalypse theories, and cosmic horror fiction. Nothing concrete, But there were patterns. Stories from cultures around the world about things that lived beneath the earth. Hungers that predated humanity. Beings that had to be sealed away for the safety of all life. Around 3 a.m. I heard it. My name called in, a voice that sounded like mine, like I was calling to myself from the basement. Ethan, come down here. You need to see this. You need to understand. I put on headphones and turned music up as loud as I could stand it, trying to drown out the voice. But it didn't matter. The voice wasn't coming through my ears. It was inside my head, speaking directly into my consciousness through that connection the marks had created. Ethan, don't listen to your father. He doesn't understand. I'm not what he thinks I am. I can show you the truth. Just come down and finish what you started. Count to 10. Open the door and let me show you what I really am. I gripped the edges of my desk, knuckles white, fighting the urge to stand up and walk to that basement door. Some part of me, some part that wasn't entirely me anymore, wanted to go. Wanted to descend those stairs and see what was really down there. What had been calling my family for generations. My bedroom door opened, and my father stood there, eyes hollow, with exhaustion. You're hearing it, aren't you? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He came in and sat on the edge of my bed. It's going to get worse before it gets better. The first week, it's relentless. After that, it settles into a pattern. You learn to tune it out mostly. But tonight, you need to stay strong. We sat together in silence. Father and son, both marked by the same ancient hunger. Both fighting against the pull of something that wanted to devour us from the inside out. As the sun finally started to rise, painting my window with early light, voice in my head faded to a whisper and then silence. My father stood, his joints cracking, and looked at me with a mixture of pride and sorrow. You made it through the first night. That's the hardest one. It gets easier to resist, easier to maintain your sense of self. But Ethan, I need to tell you something else. Something I learned from my father's journal that I haven't mentioned yet. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph of a page I hadn't seen before. There's a deadline. The marks, they spread at a predictable rate. And once they cover a certain percentage of your body, once they reach a critical mass, the connection becomes permanent. Even entering the chamber and sealing it wouldn't break it at that point. You'd be part of it regardless, an extension of the things will in the right human world. I felt my blood run cold. How long? My father's voice was barely audible. My grandfather calculated it, based on his father's progression, his own. From the moment of marking to the point of no return, you have approximately 2 years. After that, the changes are irreversible. You'd still look human, still have your memories and personality, but you'd be something else. Something that serves the thing in the chamber whether you want to or not. 2 years, 30 days, to either learn to live with an eldritch parasite slowly, transforming me into its puppet, or make the choice to seal myself in a chamber with it for eternity. I looked at my arms, at the marks that had appeared just hours ago, and tried to imagine them spreading across my entire body, rewriting my very existence. Has anyone in our family ever changed completely? I asked. Gone past the point of no return. My father was quiet for a long moment. Your great-uncle Leonard, the one who died in the basement. He didn't die from just breaking the ritual once. My grandfather's journal says Leonard had been marked for 3 years at that point. The changes had progressed too far. And that night, when he went in the basement, he didn't go to seal the chamber. He went because the thing called him and he couldn't resist anymore. He'd become enough of an extension of it that his self-preservation instincts were overridden. The thing wanted to see if it could manifest more fully by consuming someone who was already partially transformed. I felt sick. And that's what would happen to me. If I don't seal the chamber within 2 years, I'd eventually walk down there and let it consume me. My father nodded. Tears in his eyes again. I couldn't save Leonard. My father tried to stop him, but he was too strong, too determined. They found him hours later, and whatever the thing had done to him, there wasn't enough left to identify if we hadn't known it was him. I stood up, my decision crystallizing with terrible clarity. I'd spent 18 years living in this house, following my father's rules, without understanding why. Trusting that he had good reasons, even when they seemed strange. He'd protected me as much as he could. Tried to spare me from this knowledge and this fate, but now that I knew the truth, I couldn't let him bear this burden alone anymore. And I couldn't spend 2 years slowly transforming into something inhuman. Couldn't risk reaching that point of no return and walking down to the basement without any control over my actions. I need to see the chamber, I said, before I make any decisions. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Need to see it for myself. My father started to protest, but I cut him off. I'm already marked. Dad. It's already in my head. Seeing the chamber itself isn't. I'm going to make things worse at this point. And if I'm going to make a choice about whether to seal it, I need to know what I'm sealing. He argued with me for another hour. But eventually he relented. We waited until evening, until the shadows grew long and the house settled into that particular silence that comes just before dark. My father gathered supplies, a crowbar, flashlights, his grandfather's journal, a bag of salt that he said might provide some protection. If we're going to do this, he said, we do it properly. We count. We follow the rules, and at the present from this first sign of anything wrong, we get out immediately. We stood at the basement door together. My father placed his hands on the door knob and looked at me one last time. Are you absolutely sure? I nodded, my heart hammering, but my resolve firm. Together, we counted, our voices in unison. Steady and clear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 1, 0. My father turned the handle and opened the door. The basement lights were on, casting everything in harsh fluorescent brightness. It looked completely normal, exactly as it always had. We descended the stairs slowly, my father leading me right behind him. When we reached the concrete floor, he walked to the far corner to his workbench that I'd seen 1,000 times. But now he moved it aside, revealing something I'd never noticed before. A section of floor that was slightly different in color from the rest. A patch about 3 feet square that looked newer. This is it, he said. Under here is the original chamber. After Leonard died, after we found what was left of him down here, my father poured a new layer of concrete, thicker and reinforced, trying to add another barrier between us and the thing. But it's still down there. The chamber is still intact beneath this layer. He started prying at the edges of the newer concrete with the crowbar, and I helped him, both of us working in grim silence. The concrete was thick, but it had been poured in sections, and after 20 minutes of effort, we managed to lift out a large piece, revealing darkness beneath. The smell hit me immediately, that same chemical rot I'd smelled when I'd broken the count, but stronger now, concentrated. My father turned on his flashlight and shined it down into the hole. Below was stone, ancient, carved, stone covered in those symbols that now marked my skin. The original chamber, exactly as his grandfather had described it. We could see the edges of the black stone door still cracked where it had been forced open all those decades ago. There's a ladder, my father said, pointing to metal rungs that had been driven into the stone wall. My grandfather installed it after they sealed the chamber. Said someone would need access eventually to perform the sealing to finish what they'd started. He looked at me. Last chance to change your mind. Once we go down there, once we're in the actual chamber, we're in its space completely. The counting won't protect us. The same way, Helpy will be more vulnerable. I shined my own flashlight down into that darkness, seeing symbols shifting in the light, seeming to writhe and reform themselves. I need to see what I've been marked by. Need to see the door. My father nodded and started down the ladder. I followed, my hands slick with sweat on the rungs, my breath coming fast and shallow. The chamber was exactly as large as the photographs had suggested, about 10 feet square. Stone walls on all sides. And at the far end, that door, that black stone door with the crack down the middle where my ancestors had violated the seal. Standing in front of it, I understood why they'd been so horrified. The stone wasn't just black. It absorbed light, drank it in like a hungry mouth, and the symbols covering it, they weren't carved into the surface. They moved, flowing across the stone like living things, rearranging themselves constantly into new configurations. My father stepped close to the door and placed his hand on it. I've touched it before, he said, wanted to understand what it was made of. It's not stone, not really. It's warm, like skin, and you can feel something on the other side. Something aware. I moved to stand beside him, compelled by a curiosity that might not have been entirely my own. The marks on my arms were burning now, hot and itchy, responding to the proximity of whatever was beyond that door. I reached out and placed my palm flat against the black surface. My father was right. It was warm, blood warm, and through it I could feel movement, a presence, something massive and ancient and absolutely starving. It pressed against the other side of the door, like a dog pushing its nose against a fence, sensing us, knowing we were here. And then it spoke, not in words, not in any language, but directly into my consciousness, downloading information faster than I could process, showing me what it was, where it came from, what it wanted. I saw worlds without number, dimensions, stacked upon dimensions, realities where the laws of physics were suggestions, rather than rules. I saw the thing's origin born in a space between spaces, in a gap where nothing should exist, but somehow did. I saw it traveling through the cosmos, moving through cracks in reality, feeding on the life force of contemporary, entire civilizations, growing and learning and hungering. Always hungering. I saw it arriving on Earth, during an epoch when the planet was young. When the first complex life was just beginning to crawl from the oceans. I saw indigenous peoples, humans who had barely discovered fire, somehow aware of the thing's presence, somehow understanding that it needed to be contained before it could consume all life on the planet. I saw them building these chambers, these prisons, using knowledge they shouldn't have possessed, sealing the thing away with symbols and stone, and the sacrifice of their own lives to maintain the barriers. And I saw my family, 4 generations of us, marked and watched, and slowly transformed because we'd been foolish enough to disturb what should have stayed sealed. I saw the progression of the marks, saw myself as I would become if I let this continue. More symbol than skin, more thing than human. A puppet dancing on strings of ancient hunger. I pulled my hand away from the door, gasping, and found myself on my knees on the cold stone floor. My father was holding me, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. The information was still flooding my mind, still showing me things I didn't want to know. I saw the choice before me with terrible clarity. I could go back upstairs, try to live with the marks, follow the rules, and I hoped that I could make it through 2 years without breaking, without reaching that point of no return. Or I could open that door right now, step through and seal it behind me, trap myself in there with that thing, maintain the prison through my continued presence and sacrifice. Save my father from having to make that choice. Save any future children in our bloodline from ever being marked at all. My father seemed to read my thoughts because he grabbed my shoulders and forced me to look at him. No, Ethan. No. You're 18 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for my mistakes, for choices my ancestors made. If anyone's going to seal that door, it should be me. I've had my life. I've seen you grow up. I can do this, but I shook my head. Finally finding my voice. You have Mom. She's not marked. She's not connected to this thing. If you seal yourself in here, she loses you forever and doesn't even understand why. But if I do it, at least you can tell her the truth. At least you can help her understand that I chose this, that I did it to protect our family. Before he could argue further, before I could second guess myself, I stood and faced the door. The crack down the middle was just wide enough that I could see through to the other side. See the impossible space that existed beyond. It was larger than should fit in any physical dimension. A void that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions, filled with something that was both present and absent, solid and incorporeal, everything and nothing all at once. My father was crying, begging me not to do this. But I barely heard him. The marks on my skin were burning, bright now, glowing with their own light, responding to my proximity to the source of their creation. I understood, in that moment, that I'd been moving toward this choice from the second I'd stopped counting at 9. That incomplete ritual had connected me to the thing in a way that made this inevitable. Tell Mom I love her, I said to my father. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye properly. Tell her this wasn't her fault. Wasn't anyone's fault except the thing behind this door. I placed both hands on the crack in the door and pushed. It opened easier than I expected, swinging inward on hinges that couldn't exist, revealing that impossible space beyond. The smell was overwhelming now, not rot, but something older. The scent of entropy itself, of heat, death, and void, and the end of all things. I stepped forward, crossing the threshold, and felt reality shift around me. The stone chamber behind me seemed to recede, growing distant and small. While the space ahead expanded, infinitely, I was standing in the gap, between realities in the space where the thing lived. And it was all around me, through me, examining me with an attention so intense it felt like being burned and frozen simultaneously. My father was screaming my name, but the voice was fading, growing quieter as the distance between dimensions increased. I turned back one last time and saw him, through the narrowing crack of the door, saw the anguish on his face, saw his hand reaching toward me. I'm sorry, Dad, but this is the only way. Close the door. Seal it. Don't let anyone open it. Again, I pushed the door from the inside, and it swung shut with a sound like thunder, like the ending of worlds. The crack sealed itself, the stone flowing, like liquid and then solidifying, becoming whole and complete. I was alone, in the void with the thing that had haunted my family for generations. And he could feel it watching me, studying me, trying to understand what I'd done and why. The marks on my skin were spreading, rapidly now, no longer constrained by the 2-year timeline, covering my arms, my chest, my legs, crawling up my neck, toward my face. I was becoming the seal itself. My physical presence and by willpower, serving as the barrier that kept the thing contained. How long I've been here? I don't know. Time doesn't work the same way in this place. It could have been hours or years or centuries. But I can still feel the world beyond. Can still sense my father, living his life on the other side of the seal. The marks on his skin have faded, completely. I can feel that he's free of the thing's influence. And there have been no new marks on any family members. No new connections formed. The seal is holding because I'm holding it, maintaining it through my continued existence in this place between places. The thing tries to communicate with me, sometimes. Tries to show me things, offer me things, convince me to open the door and release us both. It promises knowledge, power, transformation, into something greater than human. It shows me visions of what I could become if I just let go. If I stop maintaining the seal and merge with it completely. But I remember my father's face. I remember Leonard torn apart in the basement. I remember the weight of responsibility that our family has carried for 4 generations. And I hold firm. The marks have covered me entirely now. I'm more symbolite than skin, more seal than human. But I'm still me, still Ethan, still conscious and aware and choosing to stay here. This is my sacrifice, my purpose. The reason I broke the count at 9 that night. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So, subscribe now, and let me know your take in the comments.